today.
Good morning. It gives me great pleasure to introduce this morning's speaker. Of course, he doesn't need any introduction, but he's not going to be spirited anyhow. So, Richard, who's an inhabitant of Okamic, one of our real local people, he comes to us from the University of Florida. He had a more questionable start in that he was an undergraduate at the Cowtown in Starkville, Mississippi State, where he got both a bachelor's and a master's degree, I think, in entomology.
Right.
And he then went on to the University of California, Riverside, where he got a PhD in entomology. Following that, he went to work for the Agricultural Service for 10 years. And after that experience, he decided academia was a better home for him. So he moved, although he moved to the University of Minnesota. So you survived that deep freeze for 10 years approximately. He rose to chair of the Department of Entomology and actually dean of the College of Agriculture at the University of Minnesota. And then at some point, I forget the exact year, he came to the University of Florida, where he was the head of the research stations and the dean really for research. And he sort of moved around among the administrative positions. In IFAS, he essentially wound up as the interim VP for probably a year or so toward the end, and then he retired after they got somebody new and he got him straightened out. So we're really delighted that he's here to talk to us today. In 1863, two really important things happened for this country, intellectually speaking. First, the National Academy of Sciences was enacted by the Congress and signed off on by Abraham Lincoln, who was the first person to sign into the book as a member of the National Academy, interestingly enough. And then we had the Land Grant Act, and the whole notion of land grant universities was established. That's really quite extraordinary because it gave every state the resources to develop a strong program in agriculture, research, and education. And one of the things that UF has going for it, and that FSU I'm sure hates, is that we are the land grant university in the state of Florida. This is my second land grant university. The first one I was at for a long time was Cornell, which most people don't realize is the land grant university in New York State. In any event, I think I've done enough damage to Richard to take it up enough of his time. So without further ado, welcome.
Thank you, Ken. Well, this is the first time I've done this in about 25 years. So hopefully I will get through it with a minimum of hiccups. The land grant universities, as we know them today, are the products of several pieces of legislation at the federal level that were implemented over time from 1862 to 1994, and it was 1862. Their origin arose from the notion that higher education, as it existed in the early 19th century, was not meeting the needs of the majority of the people. At that time, 90% of the people lived in the rural areas, and most of these were farmers, subsistence farmers at that. In those days, a farmer fed about 4 people or produced enough food to feed about 4 people, whereas today farmers produce food to feed several hundred people. These feelings about higher education were enhanced by the significant events of the Industrial Revolution that were sweeping over the U.S. Such things as the steam engine, the cotton gin, the McCormick Reaper, and the Railroad Acts of 1850 and 1862, which accelerated the opening of the South and the West, were transforming agriculture and industry. Many people felt that workers engaged in these academic activities could benefit from higher education just as professional people in medicine, law, and religion did, or theology. Also, many educational reformers felt that a successful democracy would require an educated populace. This required new institutions, and in a democracy, many felt that they should be publicly funded. One of the primary sources of information for farmers at this time was the agricultural societies. The first of these was created by Benjamin Franklin in 1785 in Philadelphia. And these societies served educational roles. They published journals, they sponsored research studies, and by 1861, there were as many as 900 of these agricultural societies across the United States. Also, there were attempts to start higher education for agriculture. A number of institutions were put in place. The Gardner Lyceum in Maine, 1823, which later failed financially. Then there was the Rensselaer School in New York, which offered a degree in agriculture at that time. There was King's College, which is now Columbia, Yale, together with the Sheffield Scientific School, offered it. And Pennsylvania offered the first, in Pennsylvania, the first agricultural high school emerged. And this later became Penn State University. Then in Michigan in 1855 and in Maryland in 1856, established colleges of agriculture. As states entered the Union, the federal government gave them land grants to support higher education. These land grants, I guess it's the first time I read about the land grants being involved with higher education. These arose from the Northwest Ordinances of 1785 and 1787. Of course, the Northwest then is not what we think of the Northwest today. The Northwest then was Illinois, Wisconsin, parts of Minnesota, Ohio. So these ordinances, these were the same ordinances that provided the 16th section land you've probably heard of for the common schools, which was elementary schools and high schools, to the townships, which later was taken over by the counties. But at the same time, these ordinances allowed for land grants to states as they came into the Union. And what we see here is just a few examples. In the case of Florida in 1851, they established 2 seminaries. Illinois had established a state normal school. Mississippi, which later became the University of Mississippi, a seminary in 1848. Alabama, a seminary in 1831. And Georgia had established this, of course, it was one of the original colonies, established their first the first state-supported college in the United States in 1785. A leading spokesman and proponent of the movement to establish publicly funded schools of higher education was Jonathan Baldwin Turner of Illinois. Turner was a native of Massachusetts and was educated. One of my stumbles here. I skipped a step. I wanted to tell you a little bit about what happened in Florida. There was a West Florida seminary established in Tallahassee and an East Florida seminary established in Ocala. The purpose of these schools was to provide instruction in the art of teaching and in mechanic arts, husbandry, and ag chemistry. and we'll hear more about the East Florida Seminary later on. But as I was saying, Justin Baldwin Turner was a native of Massachusetts and was educated at Yale. He held a professor position at Illinois College in Jacksonville, Illinois. He was a minister, a newspaper editor, and a horticulturist. He was forced to resign from Illinois College because of his anti-slavery views. At least that's what I read. I didn't think that would oust you in Illinois at that time, but apparently he had upset some important people. In November of 1851, he was invited to give a lecture to a farmers' convention in Granville, Illinois. He delivered what was later published, a paper that I estimated to be something over 7,000 words. But in this paper, he outlined the needs for higher education for the industrial class, which he contrasted with the professional class of people that are involved in law, medicine, religion, or theology. The industrial classes being people involved in agriculture, engineering, manufacturing, what we would today call, I think, blue-collar workers. He was of a firm belief that the existing universities supporting the professional classes could never meet the needs of the industrial classes. It was a very philosophical presentation, but he also outlined in detail what he thought a university should look like. He went so far specifically to talk about soil types, that such a university should have land that encompassed the different soil types. He indicated what subjects he thought should be taught. These institutions should have animal and plant collections. They should conduct experiments. They should have a classical department. They should test machinery. They should have stable faculty positions. Now, he never used the word tenure, but I don't know if it existed in that context at that time, but he did talk about the importance of faculty not being subject to the whims of politics and be free to conduct their own research as they saw fit. He also indicated that universities should have gala days, which now we call field days, where the university the experiment station should be open to the public to come see what was going on and then to hear presentations. And that they should be free from politics. They should have a board of trustees that was elected by the public, in his opinion. There was opposition to his ideas. In fact, some people burned his barns. Many farmers called it a utopian idea that would take kids away from the farm, which it did and still does. However, the movement gained traction with the addition of the idea that they should be funded by federal land grants. The Illinois delegation got behind the idea with the support of both Lincoln and Douglas, who both promised that if they were elected president, they would sign such legislation. The idea also had broad support in Congress, and in 1857, Justin Morrill of Vermont wrote and introduced the bill, and it was passed by the House and Senate. But President Buchanan vetoed it. He felt that it was not economical, and he didn't think that the federal government should be in the higher education business. So in 1861, Morrill reintroduced the bill, but that time it was kind of stifled by chair of the Public Lands Committee, John Potter of Wisconsin, who he detested the whole idea, so he sat on it and wouldn't let it out of committee. Then Senator Benjamin Franklin Wade of Ohio introduced it into the Senate, the same bill, where it passed as Senate Bill 298. And it then passed in the House and was signed by Lincoln in July 1862 in the midst of the Civil War. It funded what today is 69 colleges. Each state was given 30,000 acres for each member of Congress to form an endowment in support of the new land-grant colleges. Now that the states got quite a variation in the amount of money the states got. The states were granted these 30,000 acres of land. Of course, most of that land was out west, and they were in some cases were given scrip to sell for the land, and most of it sold for about $1 an acre. But states like Illinois, where I think they had 12 or 15 people in Congress at that time, whereas I think Florida had 3, 2 senators and one representative. Roy, you can correct me, maybe one more than that, but anyway, it's a lot less than Illinois. At any rate, after the passage of the Morrill Act, states began to accept the grants and create land-grant colleges. By 1873, there were 24 land-grant colleges with an enrollment of 2,600 students, and most of these students were in engineering, not agriculture. This represented 13% of the total college students in college at that time in the United States. However, the next 25 years were a struggle. Facilities were sparse and primitive. Farmers, and in particular the Grange, criticized the lack of students in agriculture. The schools were tuition-free and the states were not providing adequate funds. Congress even held an investigation that, in the end, vindicated the schools. The Hatch Act of 1887 and the Second Morrill Act of 1890 turned things around by providing annual appropriations to the colleges. These funds were required to be matched by the states. By the early 20th century, the land-grant colleges began to prosper. And here I skipped ahead a little bit, so I want to point out some things about the Morrill Act. The purpose of the funds was for the endowment, support, and maintenance of at least one college where the leading object shall be without excluding other scientific and classical studies, and including military tactics, in other words, ROTC today, to teach such branches of learning as are related to agriculture and the mechanic arts, in such manner as the legislatures may prescribe, in order to promote the liberal and practical education of the industrial classes in the several pursuits and professions in life. Now, these last 3 lines are generally considered to be the mission of the land-grant colleges, the land-grant universities. As you can see, it's a little broader than just agriculture and mechanic arts. Mechanic arts today is engineering, as we know as engineering. So it was a little broader. The second part of the Morrill Act that I found interesting, it indicated that monies from the sale of the land grants shall constitute a perpetual fund, the capital of which shall remain forever undiminished, and the interest of which shall be inviolably appropriated by each state which may take and claim the benefits of this act. Well, I hadn't heard of this fund or these monies, and so I checked with some of the old timers from the University of Florida and some of my friends back in Minnesota. Nobody else has ever heard of it. So I think over time, some of this money might have been used for buildings in violation of what this said, or funds might have just been absorbed by the states over time. So to my knowledge, this doesn't exist. And so this is what I just told you about the situation in 1873. Well, the next thing that came along was the Hatch Act of 1887. That's not to be confused with the Hatch Act, I think, of 1937, which has to do with the politics and federal civil service employees. This was an act dealing with research that was introduced by Representative Hatch of Missouri, who was chair of the Ag Committee at the time in Washington. It was during this time that states and farmers recognized the need for agricultural research. Ag chemistry was a new field, and the charlatans were selling all kinds of fertilizer portions, or trying to, I guess, Ken, not unlike the patent medicines back in the early days. But there was pioneering work in agricultural research occurring in Germany, and which in the end turned out to be pretty much a model for the U.S. research. It was led by Justice von Liebig as one of the more prominent people involved. And one of his students, Samuel Johnson, returned to the United States to lead the first agricultural experiment station, which was established in Connecticut in 1875. In fact, the term agricultural experiment station is a direct translation of the German, and I'll slaughter this, but Landwirtschaftlich Versuchsstation. Johnson's lab grew from fertilizer analysis to a full-scale research facility similar to what he encountered in Germany. The Hatch Act was an act to establish agricultural experiment stations connection with the colleges established under the Morrill Act of 1862 in order to, and the people in Congress are very fond of using in order to, they never use one word if they can find three, in acquiring and diffusing among the people of the United States useful and practical information on subjects connected with agriculture and to promote scientific investigation and experiments respecting the principles and applications of agricultural science. There shall be established a department to be known and designated as an agricultural experiment station. And these early experiment stations were separate from the colleges created in 1862. They were at the same locations and the same universities, but they were isolated units. They had research scientists, but they didn't function as teachers. The next, well, I should say something about the Hatch funds. If you have Hatch funds, they require research projects. Usually these are 5-year projects. They involve annual reports of progress. And 25% of the Hatch funds are designated as regional funds. And so they can only be used for regional multi-state projects. And there are quite a few of those. There's one been going on studying the European corn borer for probably 40 years or more that involves multiple states in the Midwest and some in the South. And these researchers on these projects, they get together once a year and they discuss the issues and lay out plans of work for what needs to be done and divvy up the projects. These things also have to fit into the USDA's goals and objectives for agricultural research, which are quite broad, and that's not usually an issue. The next thing was the Second Morrill Act in 1890. The Second Morrill Act provided additional funds for what was defined as the more complete endowment of the 1862 land-grant universities. A total of $20,000 for each college over 10 years, which doesn't sound like a lot of money, but I guess at the time it was. But here's the important part of the 1890 legislation. No payment shall be paid out to a college where distinction of race or color is made in the admission of students. But it does say, however, establishment and maintenance of such colleges separately for white and colored students shall be held in compliance if the funds from this act are equitably divided. Well, this led to the creation of what we now call the 1890 or the historical black colleges and universities. There's one in each southern state, at least one in each southern state. There are 19 in all. There's one private, Tuskegee, in Alabama, but Alabama also has a public one in Alabama A&M. There's one interesting case. Roy's, I'm sure, knows about Alcorn University in southwest Mississippi. Alcorn is actually an 1862 land grant. In 1871, the Republican Reconstructionist legislature in Mississippi bought buildings and grounds of Oakland College. Oakland College was a Presbyterian college that educated in the professional areas of law, medicine, and theology, but it closed during the Civil War. So in 1871, Mississippi legislature purchased the buildings, and they used that, and they chartered Alcorn University as a black institution with an 1862 land grant, which it still is today. But then in 1878, the legislature also created Mississippi State University as a land grant college. The next piece of legislation, and perhaps the one that best defines a land grant university, to some extent anyway, is the Cooperative Extension Service, the Smith-Lever Act of 1914. In order to aid in diffusing among the people of the United States useful and practical information on subjects relating to agriculture, home economics, and rural energy, and to encourage the application of the same, there may be inaugurated in connection with the colleges now receiving benefits of the Morrill Act, agricultural extension work which shall be carried on in cooperation with the USDA. So it has always been known as the Cooperative Extension Service. This is where the practical aspects of land-grant university research has its greatest impact. And I should tell you a little bit while we're at this point about the University of Florida's Extension Service, which is located in the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. It consists of about 150 specialists that have statewide responsibilities, and about 300 faculty members in the counties. Some of the larger urban counties, such as Miami-Dade and Duval County, have as many as 30 faculty and staff addressing areas including agriculture, natural resources, youth and families, nutrition, community, and 4-H programs. County and faculty staff are mostly funded by the counties, which is a testament to the importance the counties place on these programs. In fact, over years, there have been proposals sometime by county commissioners to cut these programs, and they have rarely done it. In fact, they, over the years, have increased these positions. Just to comment about locally, Alachua County has 10 such agents. 3 of them are multi-county agents. And for the most part, they either have PhDs or master's degrees. Now, I have a table here. I wanted to say a little bit about the funding of Hatch and Smith-Lever. The University land grants receive recurring federal funds that is based on the rural population and, in some cases, the percentage of small farms in the state. And you can see that in the case of Hatch, Florida gets about $3 million a year, whereas a state like North Carolina gets $6 million. And Georgia gets a lot, Texas gets good. Puerto Rico's on there. I should add that the territories, U.S. territories, all have land grant universities. And on the right-hand column is the extension Smith-Lever monies. It also is sort of allocated by the same formula. And these numbers change every 10 years with the new census. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I forgot I had this mic here. The next act that came along was the McIntyre-Stennis Act of 1962. And this provided federal funds for forestry research. It provides annual funds based on the acres of forested lands in the states. And the University of Florida receives just under $1 million a year from this program. Okay. Uh, then in 1977, Congress decided that they should provide some research and extension money for the 1890 schools, the black institutions, which they did. They set aside an amount of money equal 30% of the Hatch Act appropriations for the 1890s for research, and they 20% of the Smith-Lever funds for extension. And these programs, uh, uh, in the case of Florida A&M, they tend to focus more on small farm research, and the extension is coordinated with the Florida Extension Service here at the university, and so that there's not duplication of effort. Then in 1994, Congress designated the tribal colleges as land-grant colleges. They're not eligible for Hatch or Smith-Lever funds, but they do get annual appropriations from an endowment fund in the U.S. Treasury. The annual income is distributed to the colleges, and it amounts to, I looked at the list, and some colleges get like 60,000 a year, some get like 300,000 a year. Most all of these colleges are in the upper Midwest and in the West. There's none in the Southeast. They're also eligible for capacity building grants from the USDA. There has been questions raised about land grants for the tribal colleges. Their position is, since they are the indigenous people, the original occupiers of the land, that they should certainly also get land grants. But that idea has not materialized at this point. Currently, there are 58 1862 land grants. There are 19 historical black colleges and universities. There are 35 tribal colleges. Of these, 105 are public. 7 are private: Cornell, MIT, and Tuskegee in Alabama. And I have something here called A&M types. It's hard to look at the name of a university and tell whether it's a land-grant college or not. But in a number of states, the original land grants have sort of stayed not static, but kept their same missions. And they're identified as Auburn, example, Mississippi State University, where I went to school, Oklahoma State, North Carolina State, Virginia Tech, Clemson. Whereas in other instances, like the University of Florida, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, the land-grant university has combined, or it was at the same time, associated with the so-called professional school universities, so that you have a more comprehensive university. And these are the ones that are the leaders in research, in particular in the United States. I want to say a few things about the evolution of the University of Florida. In 1905, the legislature passed the Buckman Act, which brought together several institutions. At that point, the land-grant university in Florida was the Florida Agricultural College in Lake City, which was established in 1884. In 1903, its name was changed to the University of Florida. So the Buckman Act brought together the Lake City University of Florida, the East Florida Seminary in Ocala, which was established in Ocala. It was at this time had been moved to Gainesville, the St. Petersburg Normal and Industrial School, and the South Florida Military College in Bartow. Well, this produced a lot of controversy, especially some conflict between Lake City and Gainesville. People in Lake City were very upset about it. In fact, I think it led to some physical altercations. If you want to learn more about this, those of you who know Edna Hansen should talk to her. she is from Lake City, her family, and her mother was the first woman enrolled at the University of Florida in the 1920s. And I think that woman is also it's also Patsy Nelms' aunt. Uh, that's just an aside. I want to say something about teaching, research, and extension faculty. I would like to say something about teaching, research, and extension faculty. In the early days, as these programs got underway, faculty were either in the college as teaching faculty, they were in the experiment station as research faculty, or they were in extension as extension specialists. And this was partly as a result of the piecemeal funding from the federal government, the way the land grants had received these funds. Over time, the college's experiment station and extensions have become integrated into one administrative unit. Then faculty appointments over time have become joint. So now faculty in the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences here at the University of Florida, faculty may be 60% in the College of Agriculture with a teaching appointment. They may be 40% in the experiment station to do research. They may be 60% research and experiment station or 40% in extension to do specialist work. In either case, they will have a job description from when they were hired outlining these responsibilities, and they will prepare a plan for each component for which they are evaluated. Now, I did want to say a few words about University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, IFAS. This was organized in 1964 by E.T. York. And most of you probably know E.T. York. E.T. and he and Vam lived here for a number of years before they passed on. But anyway, the Agricultural Experiment Station, the Corporate Extension Service, and the College of Agriculture were all combined into this Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. Today, it has 12 research and education centers out in the state, wherein some of them teaching programs are located. In fact, you can get a University of Florida degree at Apopka or at Milton by taking courses from the local state or universities at the first two levels, taking specialty courses from faculty there at the Research and Education Center, and get a degree. IFAS currently has 900 faculty, 300 in the county, and there's 600 state faculty in teaching and research. College of Agricultural Life Sciences has 5,100 undergraduates and 1,200 graduate students. So in summary, the land-grant universities today are leaders in research and development. Of the 20 top research universities, 11 of them are land-grant universities. Of the 20 top universities producing doctorates, 12 of them are land-grant universities. These universities have forged an enduring legacy through egalitarianism, practical education, applied science and research, public service and outreach, and the fact that the federal government has a role in educational policy and funding. According to Clark Kerr, who is a distinguished education leader in California, as a result, the land-grant universities have had a profound effect on the modern American university system. The land grants have become a model for developing nations. The result has been the democratization of higher education to serve the working class, designed to meet utilitarian or useful ends with emphasis on applied sciences, particularly in agriculture and engineering. Thank you.
That was excellent. Thank you, sir. I'll give you the 1862, which I was thinking about when I said it's one of those things. You're never sure when it goes back that far.
We won't quibble over a year.
Yes, Roy.
I would just like to make a comment that I never had heard before that basically this was based on Germany and a German system. And in view of last week's talk, I now realize what a debt our educational system owes to Germany.
Yes, they were, you know, the most cultured society in Western Europe, if you will, until things sort of fell apart in the 30s. Oh, we got lots of action over here.
All right, let's go ahead and go to Keith Berg, too, if you'll unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Richard. Thank you so much for a fascinating talk. My question has to do with I think it was the Morrill Act, which seemed to be very clear about they did not allowing any racial distinction in terms of enrollment, if I understood that correctly. And I'm wondering what happened in Florida or in many other places as well, but particularly Florida, to totally escape that for many years.
Perhaps somebody else has a better answer to Florida history than me.
I think you.
Well, the legislation allowed for the creation of separate but equal institutions, which today is certainly not a complete answer, or an adequate answer, I should say. So I'm not exactly sure what your question is.
Was A&M, Florida A&M, considered a land-grant college?
Well, it's an 1890 land-grant college, but it wasn't in 1862. But Florida A&M is like the historical black colleges in every southern state. It was created by the states in 1890 to comply with the 1890 Morrill Act so that they could get the funding. But the thing is that the 1890 Morrill Act allowed them to create separate institutions.
Well, I think that's the answer
Yeah.
to Keith's question.
You have a question over here?
Okay, I have a question here, Richard. You mentioned early in your talk, you mentioned about forested areas relating to the finances. Could you expand on that? What was defined as a forested area?
Specifically, I think the Department of Interior certainly has information about the acreage of forestry in the United States, and they use those statistics for each state to allocate funds to the states for forestry research, and that money, for the most part, goes to the schools of forestry, and which are located for the most part in the land grant. And now I know in New York that money goes to the SUNY in Syracuse. I forgot to look up if SUNY is a land grant or not, but anyway, it gets the McIntyre Stennis money because it conducts the forestry research.
Those of us who were students here at the University of Florida during the late 1950s had to take mandatory ROTC for 2 years, and then I think 5 semesters of physical education. Was this a result of being a land-grant university or mandated from the federal government, or how did all this come about?
Well, the ROTC was part of the Morrill Act. So the land-grant universities had to offer military training, which evolved into what we call ROTC today. So I was at Mississippi State, I had to do 2 years of ROTC as well. But a lot of kids went to 4 years and went into the service for a couple, 3 or 4 years, and all the better for it, that's the best I could tell.
I have a comment and a question. The comment is my grandfather was an extension agent in Florida in the 30s, having moved from North Dakota, where he was doing something up there with wheat, and he worked down here in cotton. But my question is, you indicated that the land grant universities received 30,000 acres somewhere out west. And did they have ownership of those 30,000 and they could sell it off to make their money? Do any of them still own part of that land yet?
Not to my knowledge now. Some of the ones out west may still retain some ownership because most of the land was out west. But they were awarded what was called land script, which gave them the right to sell the land and to get the proceeds from it.
Yeah, University of Texas got the rights to the big dome area where all the oil was. So the University of Texas sits on all the oil in Texas, and for a long time was an extremely wealthy institution until I suspect the political component got into it a little more. Let me just say one thing about IFAS. All of the extension agents are faculty.
Yes.
So IFAS has representation in every county in the state of Florida. Now, up until sometime during the regime of Dr. Lombardi, IFAS had a separate budget from the state of Florida. And having all of those extension agents constituted a potent lobbying force to maintain the budget. And so even when the main component of the university was not doing well in the legislature, somehow IFAS, and I might say the health center, which had a similar operation, managed to do quite well until the president of the university said, you know, all that money that comes in is mine. I don't care how it comes in, but I'm going to do it all, and that's exactly what he did. And so the good days were somewhat past us.
Yeah, and that's been a story in just about in most of the states. The only one I know that still maintains its autonomy to some extent is Texas A&M, and I think they still Texas A&M. The president can't go take some of the experimentation land and put a football field on it, for example.
I had a comment. I was at Washington State University, and when I went there, I was in the College of Home Economics, and they had a department called the Home Economics Research Center. And I worked there. It was part of the College of Agriculture. And I did eventually work as assistant director of the experiment station and had to work with CSRS in Washington, D.C. And so the home economics area at Washington State dissolved when the college dissolved and was now in the College of Agriculture totally. And so my department in nutrition was also in the College of Agriculture. And I just wanted to talk about home economics because you mentioned it at one point.
Yeah.
And there are many extension agents that are dealing with that still.
Was there a question there?
No, there was no question. It was
Okay,
a
all right.
comment.
Well, I thought the last sentence might have been a question. I'm not sure.
I have a trivia question. I've always been curious. I believe the certificate that my mother obtained in 1916 in Wisconsin that enabled her to teach in a one-room schoolhouse at the beginning of her career was issued by the Wisconsin State Normal School. What the heck did the powers that be mean by normal?
Well, I don't know why they were called normal schools. It was common. Illinois had their normal, the early stages of a lot of universities were called normal schools. I haven't looked that up to find out why it was called a normal school. I guess that was better than abnormal.
Well, I'd like to thank Richard for an outstanding talk. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And before you leave, we have an important announcement of what constitutes the continuing intellectual development component of this time slot. But I'm going to let Laura Burns give you the details.
Hi. I mean, so far we've been talking about the structure of how universities were organized, and now we're making a switch. We're not leaving university entirely, but we're going to one particular place, University of Florida, and one particular specialty, which is art. So the next 3 talks will be done by curators from the Harn Museum, and each one of them will talk about what's either an ongoing special exhibit or, in one case, an upcoming one. So the next one will be the curator of photography, Carol McCusker, and she'll talk about a special exhibit there, which is about the photographer Jerry Yulesman, which I suspect most of you probably know was a sort of outstanding photographer who was based here at the University of Florida. And then we have 2 others. There has been a change from the original. The following week, we will actually have, instead of the thing on contemporary art, we will have one which is dealing with Asian art, and it will be done by the curator of Asian art, and it's on an upcoming exhibit, which won't actually be, it's not on currently, but it will be about Himalayan art. And then the last one will be on art, sort of Spanish, let's say, the Cuban art, which is a special exhibit that's on right now. And so that's what's going to happen in the future. And I hope you will all be able to come to those. So thank you.
I think that's it for this morning.